It started with the milkweed. If you ask Brenda Vance, she'll tell you it started with a blatant disregard for Section 4, Paragraph B of the Whispering Pines HOA Charter. But to anyone with a soul, it started because I wanted to save some butterflies. I bought my house 3 years ago. It's a modest, single-story mid-century ranch sitting on a quarter-acre lot. When I moved in, the front yard was a desolate square of Bermuda grass, chemically treated to a shade of green that didn't exist in nature. It required constant watering, constant mowing, and constant poisoning. So I dug it up. Over 2 weekends, I replaced the front lawn with native wildflowers. I planted purple coneflowers, wild mint, black-eyed Susans, and milkweed. Within a year, my yard was a humming, breathing haven. Bees returned. Monarch butterflies hovered over the blooms. It was alive. To Brenda, it was a cancer. Brenda lived 3 doors down. She had been the HOA president for 9 years, a tenure she wore like a military general's stars. Her own yard looked like it had been constructed by a team of plastic surgeons. There wasn't a blade of grass out of place, not a leaf allowed to decompose naturally. Every Friday morning, a crew of 6 men in bright orange vests descended on her property, wielding loud, gas-powered tools to trim her hedges into perfect, soulless cubes. Our first confrontation happened on a humid Tuesday evening in May. I was kneeling in the dirt, pulling a stray dandelion, when the low, electric whine of a golf cart signaled her arrival. Brenda didn't walk anywhere in Whispering Pines if she could help it. The golf cart was her chariot. She stopped at the curb, leaving the engine idling. She didn't get out. She just stared at me through her oversized designer sunglasses, her manicured hands gripping the steering wheel. "Arthur," she said, her voice carrying that high-register artificial sweetness that usually precedes a firing or a eviction notice. "We need to talk about the vegetation." I stood up, wiping my dirty palms on my jeans. "Hey, Brenda, if you mean the coneflowers, they're finally starting to bloom. The monarchs love them." "What I mean," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes, "is the weeds. The charter is very specific. Front lawns must consist of at least 80% approved turf grass. What you have here is an eyesore. It's driving down the property values of the entire cul-de-sac." "It's not weeds, Brenda. It's a native habitat. It actually uses 80% less water than Bermuda grass. In a drought state, you'd think the board would appreciate that." Brenda's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, practiced mask of civic authority. "The board appreciates uniformity, Arthur. We appreciate order. I'm giving you a friendly warning. Mow it down, seed it with approved ryegrass, or the fines start on Monday." I didn't mow it. Instead, I sent her a polite, cited email detailing the state's new environmental protection laws, which explicitly prohibited HOAs from banning drought-resistant native landscaping. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought the law would protect me. I underestimated how much Brenda hated being told no. First came the fines, $50, then $100, then $500. Every week a new envelope arrived in my mailbox, each one citing a different, increasingly absurd infraction. Unsanctioned biological growth, failure to maintain aesthetic harmony, attracting pests, which, as far as I could tell, referred to the ladybugs currently eating the aphids off my plants. I ignored them all, keeping a detailed log of the correspondence and consulting a friend who practiced environmental law. He assured me the state statutes were on my side. "She's bluffing," he told me over a beer. "No HOA is stupid enough to go to court over a patch of wildflowers when the state Supreme Court has already ruled on this." He was wrong. Brenda wasn't bluffing. On a rainy Thursday morning in October, a man in a damp windbreaker knocked on my door. He handed me a thick manila envelope and walked away without saying a word. Inside was a summons. The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association was suing me. They weren't just asking for the unpaid fines, which had ballooned to nearly $4,000 with administrative fees. They were suing for injunctive relief. They wanted a court order allowing the HOA to enter my property, bulldoze the garden at my expense, and replant it with approved sod. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. My stomach dropped into a cold, heavy pit. A lawsuit meant lawyers. Lawyers meant money I didn't have. I spent that entire night sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by printouts of the HOA bylaws, trying to find a loophole, a shield, anything to stop them from destroying my yard. As I dug through the bylaws, I realized something. To file a lawsuit on behalf of the association for an amount exceeding $3,000, The board was required by Section 9 to hold a majority vote of the homeowners, or at least present a detailed legal expense budget at the annual meeting. I looked at the paperwork. There had been no vote. The annual meeting had occurred 3 months ago, and the budget they distributed had listed the legal defense fund at a flat $5,000. My lawsuit alone would cost the association tens of thousands in retainer fees. Where was the money coming from? The next morning, I exercised my right as a dues-paying member of the association. Under state property code, any homeowner has the right to inspect the financial records, bank statements, and general ledgers of the HOA upon written request. I drafted the request, sent it certified mail to the HOA's management company, and CC'd Brenda. I expected pushback, but I didn't expect the silence that followed. For 2 weeks, nothing. The management company ignored my emails. Brenda's golf cart stopped patrolling my street. It was as if the entire neighborhood had gone quiet, waiting for the storm to hit. Finally, on a Friday afternoon, I received a call from a terrified-sounding receptionist at the management company. "Mr. Pendleton," she whispered, "I'm sending you a secure link to the digital portal. The ledgers from the last 5 years are uploaded. Please don't tell Brenda I gave you the password. She told us to archive your request indefinitely." "Why would she do that?" I asked. "Just look at the bank statements," she said, and hung up. I opened my laptop. My kitchen was dark, the only light coming from the blue glare of the screen. I logged into the portal and downloaded 5 years of Excel spreadsheets, bank statements, and vendor invoices. I am not an accountant. I'm a high school biology teacher. But you don't need a degree in forensic accounting to notice when things don't add up. Whispering Pines has 140 homes. Each homeowner pays $200 a month in dues. That's $28,000 a month, $336,000 a year. The neighborhood has no pool, no clubhouse, and no tennis courts. The only common expenses are the entrance gate, the streetlights, and the landscaping for the common areas along the main road. Yet, according to the ledgers, our operating expenses were nearly identical to our income every single year. We were running a razor-thin surplus of less than $1,000. I started looking at the vendors. There was a company listed as Vance Greenery and Design. Over the past 4 years, this company had been paid an average of $10,000 a month for supplemental landscape maintenance. $10,000 a month for a neighborhood with 2 brick entrances and a strip of grass along the county road. I searched the state business registry for Vance Greenery and Design. The registered agent was Brenda Vance. The business address was a P.O. box in a town 30 miles away. The company had no website, no reviews, and no employees listed on any professional network. I dug deeper. I pulled the actual check scans from the bank statements. Every single check made out to Vance Greenery and Design was signed by Brenda herself, in her capacity as HOA president, and deposited into a private account at a small regional bank. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She had simply created a fake landscaping company, billed the HOA for imaginary services, and signed the checks over to herself. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the pages. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began tallying the payments to Vance Greenery and Design over the last 4 years. 48 months. Average payment, $10,000. Total, $120,000. It was gone. $120,000 of our neighborhood's money, funded by our hard work, our monthly sacrifices, our dues. The money that should have paved the cracked asphalt on our roads, replaced the rusted entry gate, and helped lower our dues had been funneled directly into Brenda's personal bank account. And she was using the remaining HOA funds, our money, to sue me because she didn't like my flowers. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my house suddenly feeling very loud. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. She had spent nearly a decade ruling this neighborhood like a tyrant, issuing fines, bullying elderly neighbors over their mailboxes, and forcing families to paint their front doors approved shades of beige, all while systematically robbing us blind. I looked out my kitchen window. In the moonlight, the purple coneflowers in my front yard swayed gently in the autumn breeze. They looked wild, chaotic, and beautiful. Brenda wanted a war over these flowers. I looked back at the spreadsheet on my screen, the rows of stolen numbers glowing in the dark. I decided to give her one. I didn't sleep that night. By 4:00 a.m., my kitchen table was covered in neat, chronological piles of bank statements, tax filings, and business registration documents. I had cross-referenced every check issued to Vance Greenery and Design with the corresponding HOA monthly report. The fraud was so consistent it was almost boring. Every single month, on the 15th, Brenda would sign a check to her shell company for exactly $9,800, just shy of the $10,000 threshold that might trigger automatic banking alerts or require secondary board approval under our outdated bylaws. I needed to act, but I had to be smart. If I went to the police immediately, the wheels of justice would grind slowly. Brenda would hire a high-priced defense attorney using the very money she stole from us. The lawsuit against my garden would proceed, and by the time any charges were filed, my wildflowers would be bulldozed and paved over. I needed to dismantle her public standing first. I needed to show the neighborhood exactly who had been lecturing them about community standards. The next annual HOA meeting and board election was scheduled for late November, exactly 3 weeks away. It was the perfect stage. According to the bylaws, any member in good standing could run for the board of directors, provided they submitted their petition with 10 signatures from registered homeowners at least 15 days before the vote. The next morning, I printed 30 copies of my petition. I also printed 30 copies of a very simple, single-page document. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a side-by-side comparison of the HOA's official annual budget and the Public Business Registry filing for Vance Greenery and Design, showing Brenda's signature as both the payer and the payee. No emotional language, no insults. Just cold, hard, undeniable public records. I started on the south side of the neighborhood, furthest from Brenda's house. My first stop was Mrs. Gable, an 82-year-old widow who had lived in Whispering Pines since the late 90s. Last year, Brenda had fined her $300 because her grandson had parked his pickup truck in her driveway overnight during a Thanksgiving visit. When I showed Mrs. Gable the paper, she stared at it through her thick reading glasses for a long time. Her hand began to tremble, but it wasn't from age. It was from pure, unadulterated fury. She told me we didn't have the funds to fix the street lamp outside my bedroom, Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice shaking. She said the association was facing a budget deficit because of unpaid dues from people like you. We have a surplus, Mrs. Gable, I said quietly. Or at least we should have, it's just been going into her pocket. She signed my petition so hard the pen tore through the paper. What do we do? We change the guard, I said. I'm running for her seat. By Saturday afternoon, I had walked the entire neighborhood. I didn't just get the 10 signatures I needed. I got 84. Word spread through Whispering Pines like a brush fire. People who had spent years quietly paying arbitrary fines, pulling up non-conforming mailbox posts, and hiding their trash cans behind expensive privacy screens were suddenly united by a shared, boiling resentment. On Monday morning, I walked up the steps of the local courthouse and filed 2 documents. First, my official appearance in the lawsuit Brenda had brought against me, representing myself to save money. Second, a formal countersuit against Brenda Vance, both individually and in her capacity as president of the Whispering Pines HOA, alleging breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion of association assets. I attached the financial ledgers as Exhibit A. By Tuesday, Brenda knew. I was in my front yard, checking the soil moisture around my sleeping coneflowers, when the familiar electric hum of the golf cart echoed down the street. It was moving much faster than usual. She slammed on the brakes at my curb, the tires screeching slightly on the asphalt. She didn't stay in the cart this time. She threw the door open and marched onto my property, her face flushed a dark, angry purple. She was clutching a copy of my lawsuit in her manicured hand. "Are you out of your mind?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the neighbors wouldn't hear, though I could see several curtains twitching in the houses across the street. "This is slander, Arthur. This is malicious prosecution. I will have you ruined. I will sue you for every penny you have, and then I'll take this house." "It's not slander if it's true, Brenda," I said, leaning calmly on my spade. "The state business registry is public. The bank check scans are public. You signed the checks. You took the money." "That was for legitimate consulting services," she yelled, her composure cracking completely. "I have put 10 years of my life into managing this ungrateful neighborhood. I deserve to be compensated for my time. Do you have any idea how much work it takes to keep this place from looking like a trailer park? The bylaws explicitly state that board positions are voluntary and uncompensated, I replied. And even if they weren't, you don't get to invent a fake company and pay yourself a six-figure salary without the knowledge or consent of the homeowners. That's not compensation, Brenda. That's embezzlement. She took a step closer, her eyes darting to the wildflowers behind me. For a second, I thought she was going to start ripping them out with her bare hands. You think you're so clever with your little garden and your court papers. You think these people care? They're sheep, Arthur. They want someone else to handle the dirty work so they can watch TV in peace. They won't vote for you. We'll see about that on the 28th, I said. Oh, and by the way, I submitted my candidacy petition yesterday. 84 of your sheep signed it. The color drained from her face. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For the first time since I had met her, she had absolutely nothing to say. She turned around, marched back to her golf cart, and sped away, the electric motor whining in protest. The next 2 weeks were a blur of grassroots organizing. My house became the unofficial campaign headquarters. Neighbors I had never spoken to before started showing up on my porch with coffee, homemade cookies, and ideas for the neighborhood. We set up a private community forum online, completely bypassing the official HOA newsletter that Brenda controlled. We discussed things that actually mattered: repairing the cracked sidewalks, installing solar-powered lights at the school bus stop, and amending the bylaws to protect eco-friendly landscaping. For the first time in 9 years, there was a sense of actual community in Whispering Pines, rather than just forced compliance. Meanwhile, my legal friend helped me file a motion for an emergency injunction to freeze the HOA's bank accounts. We argued that the current president was actively converting association funds for personal use, including funding her private lawsuit against me. The judge granted the hearing for the day before the annual meeting. The courtroom was small, smelling of old paper and industrial floor cleaner. Brenda sat at the defense table, flanked by a young, nervous-looking attorney she had hired using her own money this time. The HOA's accounts were already locked in a temporary freeze. She wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the mahogany bench, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles in her cheek were twitching. Our hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. When my lawyer friend, who had agreed to represent me pro bono for the hearing, presented the check scans alongside the HOA's own financial disclosures, the judge's eyebrows shot up. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, looking down over his glasses at Brenda's lawyer, "does your client have invoices, timesheets, or any verifiable record of the work performed by Vance Greenery and Design that would justify $120,000 in disbursements?" Brenda's lawyer stood up, clearing his throat nervously. "Your Honor, my client maintains that the services were rendered, but due to the informal nature of the volunteer board, some bookkeeping discrepancies may have occurred." "Discrepancies?" the judge scoffed. "This looks less like a discrepancy and more like a personal piggy bank. The temporary freeze on the association's accounts is extended indefinitely, pending a full forensic audit. Furthermore, the HOA's lawsuit against Mr. Pendleton is stayed. We will not be wasting this court's time on a dispute over wildflowers, while a six-figure fraud investigation is underway." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 6 months. I looked over at Brenda. She looked smaller now, stripped of her golf cart, her official title, and her sense of absolute invincibility. But she wasn't done yet. As we walked out of the courtroom, she cornered me in the hallway. Her expensive sunglasses were pushed up on her head, revealing dark, sleepless circles under her eyes. "You think you won?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. "But you haven't. The audit will take months, and tomorrow night is the annual meeting. I've still got allies on that board, Arthur. We control the proxy votes of the rental properties and the developers. You don't have the numbers to oust me." "I don't need allies, Brenda," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I have the truth. I'll see you at the meeting." The Whispering Pines elementary school cafeteria smelled of stale floor wax and cardboard boxes. Usually, the annual HOA meetings were ghost towns, attended by 5 or 6 bored residents who only showed up to complain about the streetlights. Tonight was different. Every single metal folding chair was occupied. People were lined up along the cinder block walls, whispering in hushed, charged tones. At the front of the room sat the board of directors behind a long, folding table. Brenda sat in the center, flanked by her vice president and her treasurer. She wore a sharp cream blazer, her hair sprayed into a rigid helmet. She looked poised, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her pen. Beside her lay a stack of thick paper folders, the proxy votes she claimed would save her. At exactly 7 o'clock, Brenda tapped her microphone. The high-pitched feedback made the crowd wince. "Welcome, everyone, to the annual meeting of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association," she said, her voice projecting a brittle confidence. "We have a lot of standard business to cover tonight, including our budget proposal for the upcoming fiscal year and, of course, our board elections." "Let's skip to the budget, Brenda," a voice shouted from the back. It was Mr. Miller, a retired contractor from the north side. Brenda cleared her throat, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We will follow the agenda, Mr. Miller. First, we will address the ongoing litigation regarding covenant violations, followed by—" "No, we won't," I said, standing up from my seat in the third row. A quiet ripple went through the room. Brenda glared at me, her mask of professional calm slipping for a fraction of a second. "Mr. Pendleton, you are out of order. You will have your turn to speak during the open forum at the end of the meeting." "This isn't an open forum issue, Brenda. This is a matter of immediate concern for every single person paying dues in this room," I said. I stepped out of the row and walked to the front, holding a heavy cardboard box. I placed it on the edge of the board's table. "Arthur, sit down or I will have you escorted out," Brenda warned, her voice dropping an octave. "By who?" I asked, looking around the room. "The security company we pay $3,000 a month for, which also happens to be registered to a shell address." The room erupted into murmurs. I reached into the box and pulled out a stack of stapled documents, handing them to the residents in the front row to pass back. "What you are holding," I announced, turning to face the crowd, "is the preliminary report from the forensic accountant we hired last week, alongside the public court records from yesterday's injunction hearing. As some of you already know, our HOA accounts have been frozen by a state judge. That is a temporary administrative issue," Brenda yelled into her microphone, but her treasurer, a quiet man named Greg, sank low in his chair, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "It's a freeze," I continued, "because over the last 4 years, $120,000 of our collective dues have been paid directly to a company called Vance Greenery and Design. A company that has no employees, no equipment, and lists Brenda Vance as its sole owner and registered agent." The room went completely silent. The weight of the number $120,000 hung in the air. "She sued me," I said, pointing toward the window, "using our association fees because I planted native wildflowers. She wanted to spend $10,000 of our money on legal fees to destroy a $20 patch of coneflowers. And she did it because she knew that if anyone started looking too closely at her rules, they might start looking at her books." "This is a circus," Brenda shouted, standing up. Her chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. "These are unverified allegations. I have dedicated a decade to this community. I have kept your property values high. If you think you can run this neighborhood without me, you are sorely mistaken." She grabbed her stack of folders and slammed them onto the table. "I hold 65 proxy votes from the rental properties on the east side and the remaining developer lots. Under Section 3 of the bylaws, those votes are legally binding. You do not have the majority to remove me, Arthur." She thought she had us. In Whispering Pines, about 40% of the homes were owned by out-of-state landlords who handed their proxy voting rights to the board presidency automatically each year. It was the armor that had kept her in power for nearly a decade. I smiled. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "I'm glad you brought up the proxy votes, Brenda," I said, "because I spent the last 3 days contacting those out-of-state landlords. It turns out, when you send a landlord a copy of a court-ordered bank freeze and a pending embezzlement investigation, they get very cooperative. They don't particularly like the idea of their properties being tied to a criminal enterprise." I laid the paper on the table in front of her treasurer. "Those are 63 signed revocations of proxy authority," I said. "The owners of those rental properties have designated their votes to me. Along with the 84 homeowners present tonight, we have a 92% voting majority." Brenda looked at the paper. Then she looked at her treasurer, Greg, who slowly nodded, his face pale. "The proxies are valid, Brenda," Greg whispered, his voice cracking. "They're gone." The silence in the cafeteria was absolute. Brenda looked at the crowd. For years, she had looked down at these people from her golf cart, issuing demands and handing out penalties. Now she was looking at a wall of cold, unforgiving faces. There were no defenders left. Her vice president quietly packed his folder into his briefcase, stood up, and walked off the stage without saying a word. "We need a motion to remove Brenda Vance as president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association," I said into the microphone. "So moved," Mr. Miller yelled from the back. "Seconded," Mrs. Gable called out from the front row. "All in favor." Every single hand in the room went up. It was a silent, rising tide of palms. "Opposed." Brenda stood alone, her hand remaining at her side. Her treasurer slowly raised his hand to signify the vote was unanimous. "The motion carries," I said. "Brenda, you are officially removed from the board. We require you to hand over all physical keys, ledgers, and association property by noon tomorrow." Brenda didn't scream. She didn't argue. The anger seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind a cold, hollow shell. She picked up her designer purse, adjusted her cream blazer, and walked down the center aisle of the cafeteria. The crowd parted for her in silence. She walked out the double doors, and the heavy metal bar clicked shut behind her. The election for the new board took 10 minutes. The community voted me in as the new president, with Mr. Miller as vice president and a retired accountant named Sarah taking over the treasury. Our first official act was to vote unanimously to drop the lawsuit against my garden. 6 months later, Whispering Pines looked different. The transition wasn't easy. The forensic audit took 3 months and confirmed the full extent of Brenda's theft. The state attorney's office filed formal charges of grand larceny and embezzlement against her. Her trial was set for the winter, and her manicured house down the street was put on the market to help pay the restitution she owed the neighborhood. Her golf cart was gone, sold off as part of her assets. But the real change wasn't in the courtroom, it was on the streets. With the stolen funds frozen and eventually returned to our municipal accounts, we lowered the monthly HOA dues by 40%. We hired a local, legitimate landscaping crew to trim the common areas, at a fraction of what Brenda had billed us, and used the remaining surplus to finally repair the cracked sidewalks and install solar lighting at the school bus stop. But the biggest change was in the front yards. The strict, artificial uniformity of Whispering Pines began to dissolve. My garden was no longer an outlaw outpost. Encouraged by the change in bylaws, several neighbors began planting their own small patches of native flowers. Mrs. Gable put in a beautiful bed of blue salvia. Mr. Miller started a small vegetable patch near his driveway. It was mid-May, almost a year to the day since Brenda had first pulled up to my curb in her golf cart. I was kneeling in my yard, checking on the new growth of milkweed. The afternoon sun was warm on my back. The purple coneflowers were taller this year, their thick green stems reaching toward the light. A shadow fell over the dirt. I looked up. It was a young family who had moved into the neighborhood a few weeks ago. They were pushing a stroller, their young daughter pointing at the garden. "Look, Daddy," she piped up, pointing her finger at a vibrant monarch butterfly resting on a milkweed leaf. "It's so pretty." The father smiled and nodded at me. "Beautiful yard, Arthur." "Thanks," I said, wiping a bit of dirt from my hands. "It takes a little while to grow, but it's worth it." I stood up and watched them walk down the street. The neighborhood was quiet, but it was no longer silent. It was filled with the rustle of leaves, the hum of bees, and the distant sound of children laughing. It was finally home,